If you know a gardener or someone that loves plants, you're going to want to make this project for them. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to do a project that's a little bit different. It's not quite a turned bowl. However, the final product that we're going to make will be a vessel. So stay tuned to see what we make. And if you have friends that are into gardening or enjoy growing plants, they're going to love this as a gift. So you're going to want to make several of these and hand them out to all of your friends that are into gardening and plants. So with that being said, I'm going to take this piece of black cherry over to the bandsaw. We're going to get this ripped down to a nice square stock so we can put it on the lathe and start turning. So let's jump into it.
Okay, so one of the things I want to do right off the bat is I want to make sure I get this relatively square. This is about 3 inches wide or close to 8 centimeters. So I'm going to mark that 3-inch point on the top of this blank. And I'm going to mark it in a couple different places. That way I know that I'm following the path as I'm guiding this through the bandsaw. And I'm cutting away the outer bark area, which is typically the sapwood, and it's not quite as durable as the heartwood that's in the center of the piece, and that's what we'll be turning, is the heartwood in the center. Now this piece is rather long, so I'm going to split it in half because I can make 2 of the projects with this piece, so I'm going to go ahead and split that right now. There we go. I'll tell you, this black cherry is gorgeous. I love working with black cherry. Basically, any of the fruit or nut wood trees are fantastic for turning. Okay, I'm going to mark the center point of each end of this. I'm using a center gauge. I'll put links to all the equipment that I use in the description of this video if you want to check those out. I'm using a few different things here that I don't normally use when turning bowls, like a center guide I typically don't use for that. I'm going to find the center of each end. If you don't have that center located perfectly, if it's off center a little bit, you're basically just going to turn a narrower cylinder. So you're going to waste material. So the closer you can get to that exact center, the better you're going to be at maximizing the amount of wood you have. Now I'm using a cup drive center on the headstock, and I have a cup live center on the tailstock. What that means is the headstock, it's a drive center. It doesn't have any bearings in it, so it's using the momentum of the headstock to move the entire piece. The tailstock has the live center, which does have bearings. It's rotating to keep up with the headstock. So you want to make sure you get those right. When you first start turning, that can be a little confusing, trying to figure out which one goes where. Okay, I'm going to use my bowl gouge, and I know that's not a typical spindle turning tool, but guess what, it works. And as I always encourage you guys, do what works best for you. If you have a tool that gets the job done for you, then use it. I am very comfortable with my bowl gouges, and I know I can do a good job with that. Yeah, I could use a skew chisel or a spindle gouge, but I've got the bowl gouges and I'm going to use those. So I'm just knocking down those corners. And with the corners down, I'm going to bring the tool rest in. We always want to keep that tool rest relatively close to our turning to give good support to the tool and prevent vibration. Now, the advantage of the cup drive centers is what you just saw right there. I got a little catch on the end of that. And that catch, instead of grabbing and flipping the piece off the lathe, it just spun those little cups at the headstock and the tailstock. They just spun in place. And that'll also happen if the tailstock is not tight. So you want to continually tighten the tailstock as you turn, because those cups will drive themselves into the wood just a little bit. And as they do that, they'll kind of loosen up. So you'll need to tighten that tool rest. And again, if you don't, essentially the piece will just spin in place, so it's not going to go flying off the lathe. So that's one of the huge advantages of using the cup drive center and the cup live center. To make nice smooth passes here, we want to move our body, not the tool. So that bull gouge is locked up against my side. My hands and arms are not moving. The only thing that's moving is I have my knees unlocked and I'm flexing my body weight from left to right, or shifting my body weight left to right. Flexing sounds like I'm doing some kind of muscle workout, but no, there's no workout here. It's just shifting from left to right and putting down pressure into the tool rest. By pushing down into the tool rest and only let the weight of your shifting body move the tool, you will get a nice straight line as you ride the bevel across. You want to take your time, kind of eyeball this. I'm just eyeballing it to get it to a cylinder that's relatively even. I can see the end is a little bit thicker, so I'm going to kind of work back and then take just a thin layer off the right side. Now, unlike bowls, spindles, you can get the speed up much higher. I'm guessing I'm in a couple thousand RPMs here. That's going to also allow you to make a nice smooth cut. Okay, the cylinder is relatively even. Now I'm going to work on the end. I'm going to put a tenon down here, but I have to square up the end first. By the way, everything I've been doing so far, I've been using my 1/2-inch bowl gouge. This is a 55-degree bevel swept-back bowl gouge, my standard bowl gouge. And that's... You just want to make light cuts here. Remember, this is ingrain that we're cutting through, so we're cutting across those ingrain fibers. So go slow and you make a nice clean cut there. Now I'm going to mark where the tenon will be using my dividers. And I'm basically lining up and eyeballing the right point of the guide, or the dividers, over the right side of that circle. But you don't ever want to let the right side of the dividers touch, because they're going to get flipped over in the rotation of the lathe. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention to you, I've been getting a lot of questions. I get these periodically about the size of the bowl gouge. And by the way, I'm switching to my detail spindle gouge here to do the tenon dovetail. But the bowl gouge, and the spindle gouge for that matter, in the United States, we label them based on the size of the shaft. So when I say a 1/2-inch bowl gouge, that's the 1/2-inch shaft. The flute is, I believe, 3/8 of an inch. So the flute is narrower, obviously. The 5/8-inch bowl gouge that I use for roughing is the 5/8 inch is the outside of the shaft of the bowl gouge, and the flute is a 1/2 inch on that. And I believe it's in the United Kingdom, they call it, they size it based on the size of the flute. So that can be a little bit confusing. So a 1/2-inch bowl gouge in England is essentially a 5/8 inch bowl gouge that I'm using here. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Okay, so I've got the tenon done. I'm going to reverse this blank and put it in my 4-jaw chuck. Which is going to give me a much more stable opportunity for turning. I will bring the tailstock up for support here. You always want to use the tailstock whenever you can. Basically remove it only when it's in the way for a particular cut that you're making. And before I do that, I'm going to mark the size of this. This is a little longer than I really needed. I probably almost could have gotten 3 blanks out of that piece that I had at the bandsaw. So that's going to be about that long. And at the top, about the top third, I'm going to put a decorative kind of handle or ornate knob on the top of that. But I need to remove some of this material first, and I'm going to do that with my parting tool. Now with the parting tool, this is a peeling cut. On an ingrained spindle like this is a peeling cut. And what that means is we're angled so that the tip is peeling away the material. You're not just driving the parting tool into the piece horizontal. You're peeling away. And I'm doing two paths. If you see, I'm nibbling a little bit to the right and a little bit to the left. And that's preventing the tool from binding up in the slot that I'm making. If I just went in straight in and made one cut, eventually that piece is going to get bound up in there and it's going to cause issues. Now I had to get the tailstock out of the way too, because to break this free, it would bind up if the tailstock were there as well. So I need this to fall away free. So I just nibble a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and that keeps a nice wide enough path for the parting tool to not be bound up, and I can work my way down. Okay, and I'll set that piece aside. I can use that later for something else. But now we have the piece sized to the length that we need. So I'm going to use my 1/2-inch bowl gouge and clean up this end grain. Look at those long peels coming off this end grain. That's pretty interesting. Typically with a side grain bowl, which is what I normally turn, you don't get those shavings like this with a cross cut. The grain of the fruit wood and the nut wood trees is just absolutely gorgeous. It's very dense, and that's what makes it really nice. Now I'm going to mark off about a 1/2 inch or about a 12 millimeter distance from the edge for the next step. Now, in hindsight, I probably would have made this piece just a little bit bigger so that I could get the jaws of my 4-jaw chuck inside this slot. And this hole is a little bit too small for that, so we'll deal with that in just a second. It'll all come together. You'll see in a minute. Now, because this is in grain, we can start in the center and work our way out. And I got a really good kickback there because it's center grain or in grain, and I'm cutting against the grain direction. I've got a video all about grain direction if you want to check that out. Now I'm actually cutting against the grain here. I'm just boring out a hole at this point. I'm not trying to make a finishing pass. It's very difficult to get the edge started in the in grain, but you want to just wait for the tool to start and then make your pass in there. I'm going to use a little bit of an interesting technique here that I don't typically use. I'm going to come in here with a spindle detail gouge, and what's nice about the spindle detail gouge is I can get down into that corner. I want to make a nice squared off interior hollowed out area. So I'm going to start a cut at 90 degrees. I'm going to work the tool in straight in. So the cut I'm making is parallel with the exterior of this piece. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different, a lot different. I'm going to reverse the lathe. If you notice, the direction just reversed, and now I'm going to cut away because the piece is going out and down. What I'm doing is I'm cleaning up that inside corner, and I'm doing it in a supported grain direction by moving it from the center out. I'm going to go ahead and clean up that bottom corner a little bit. And that was back to the regular direction with the piece turning over the top towards me. Okay, while I have this good supported connection to the 4-jaw chuck, I'm going to use my spindle detail gouge, and I'm going to start making this cove for the decorative top of this piece. I'm simply starting with a nice bevel rubbing cut at the top of the curve of each side, and then leading in towards the valley with the point of the tool. So starting at the top, rubbing the bevel, letting the cutting edge engage, and then rolling the tool around down into the valley. And as each pass proceeds, that curve is becoming larger, so you have to start a little bit farther back than the previous cut. And just take your time. You can ease off these high spots and then work down into that groove. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to reverse it. This is where I would have preferred to have put that bottom into the jaws, but unfortunately it's too small and will not fit. So what I'm doing is I'm putting a piece of leather around this, and that's going to minimize the amount of grooves or dig marks that the jaws are going to make. They're going to make some marks. They'll be sandable, but this little strap of leather is going to help minimize those. And now I have the other end of this piece exposed. I'm going to bring the tailstock up for the moment, but now I'm going to work the top curve. And I'm going to do the same thing I was just doing. I'm going to roll the spindle gouge around the corner to curve the top of this piece. What we're looking for is you're looking for any high spots where there's clearly a change in direction. Instead of having an area where it's flat and then you see a high spot and you see the curve continue, you want that to be one continuous curve. It's just like doing the exterior of the bowls, basically. You want a nice flowing curve. Now I have this tenon material that I need to remove. I'm just going to do that slowly. I'm using the bowl gouge to make a nice controlled cut across the end grain fibers here. Again, I'm very familiar with the bowl gouge. This could be done with the spindle gouge as well, but I'm more comfortable with the bowl gouge. Do what works best for you. Okay, so following that curve around, it's getting pretty close there. So now we can get the tailstock out of the way after I decide to clean up these curves just a little bit. You can see that high spot there. I'm just going to ease that down a bit. There we go. I had the lathe a little bit slow there. I can turn it up. I don't do, as you know, I don't do a ton of spindle turning, so I'm not really used to having the lathe going crazy fast. And for me, crazy fast is spindle speed. But again, it's relatively safe with a spindle piece like this, but it is not safe to get up into the multiple thousand RPMs with a bowl blank, simply because of the size and the mass of this. The size and mass of this piece is contained to that central area. I have a video all about lathe speed, and you're going to want to check that out if you got any questions about what speed to turn your pieces. Okay, so I'm going to sand that up a bit while it's all well supported, and then I'm going to take off the rest of this nub. Now these are end grains coming out, so I need to go across them to cut them efficiently. So I'm going to use the bowl gouge and I'm going to go slow, because even though this spindle piece is turning very fast, that center point, its rotation is relatively slow compared to the rest of the outside of the piece. Again, check out that video. I've got all about lathe speed. Now here I'm coming up. I just want to merge this top edge right into the curve of the rest of the piece. So I want to go slow and gradual. It almost looks like it's merged there, but I can still see the high spot. That got most of it. Look at those long shavings coming off. That's so cool. There's still a high spot there. I can see it. We're going to have to move those, move in just a bit and clean that up just a touch. Yeah, I got it. Like you can see that high spot right on the tip where the curve is interrupted. So I'm going to come back in and just very lightly. Now, could that have been sanded off? Yeah, but I would rather make a nice clean cut and then do minimal sanding and have the structure of the curve already there. So right now when I'm sanding, I'm just basically smoothing up that material. I'm not trying to do a lot of shaping. You can shape with sanding paper, but I'd rather do most of the shaping with the bowl gouge. And just like the bowl, you want to pause and sand the center area. You don't really want to go over it a whole bunch with the powered sandpaper when the lathe's turning, because you're going to create a groove or a valley there. You're going to work from the center down and make that nice and smooth. Then I'm going to change out the sanding disc and go through. I'm going from 180 grit to 240 to 320. And again, this black cherry is just absolutely wonderful for these type of projects. It's just a nice solid wood that it has a beautiful grain and color, and just a great piece. All right, I think we've got the first section of our project complete. This is looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and take that little leather strap off, and we've got that done.
If you're enjoying this video, do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen. It tells YouTube that you're enjoying this, and it helps the video and helps this channel and helps everything out, and I thank you for clicking the like button. Thank you.
Okay, we need to create another section, and I'm using another piece of the black cherry here. This is going to be the base for what we're making. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this up on the bandsaw. I typically try to keep my hands at least 4 or 5 inches away from the cutting blade at all times. It's not always possible, but try to keep that in mind, and be very conscious of where you're applying pressure, and make sure your hands and arms aren't pushing into the blade very close to the blade, because one slip or the wood cutting quicker than you're expecting and you've got your hand in that path, you're going to have problems. So what I do is I'll typically do a rotation like this, and I see my hands getting closer, then I will go reach around and hold the wood from the back side so that I don't have my hand or body in the path that would be moving into the cutting blade. Okay, so there's the piece that we're going to do now. This is a little bit larger than what we need. We're going to be kind of whittling this down a little bit more than I would like. If I were making a bowl, I would be trying to make this as almost the same size as the cutout blank that we have now, but that's not what we're doing. We're trying to make a base that matches to the piece that we just made. So it's going to be a little bit different what we're doing here. And I do have a weird irregularity in this piece. I've got like a bark enclosure there, you can see, and I'm going to be removing a bunch of that, plus that bark on the outside. That's all going to get removed. Now I am using a 4-spur drive center on the headstock now. I'm not using that cup drive center that you saw earlier. That typically grips a bowl blank like this much better and prevents it from slipping or rotating. So using the bowl gouge, I'm going to clean up the ends, or clean up the edge here and make it nice and straight, and also at the same time reduce and remove material to get this down to the size that I'm looking to make. You can see that controlled movement. My hands and arms are doing almost no movement at all. It's the shift of my body weight that's making the cut. I'm applying down pressure with my left hand onto the tool rest so that the bowl gouge is just riding along that tool rest perfectly smooth. And basically this is going to be a base that the first part of this project that we made will be setting down into. So we have to make a shape that will match the bottom of that piece. I'm wondering how many people are watching the video at this point and you're still watching what I'm doing without fast forwarding to the end. I hope you haven't done that, because then it'll like spoil everything. You'll know what I'm making. There's different types of personalities, and I know there's people. Sometimes I get curious and I want to see what's going on, but I think I can wait and see what's happening with the project. But I'm just wondering if you guys are following along to this point, or if you've skipped to the end to see what I'm making. Okay, so I'm going to mark a tenon here. Now, there's a variety of different ways that this can be done. I often think of these points of the projects where you visualize how you're going to get from one section to the next as kind of like a roadmap or driving. You know, you can all get to the same destination using different routes. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to use a tenon first, and then I'm going to mount this in the 4-jaw chuck. As you know, I'm a big fan of tenons. And for the bowls, for bowl blanks, it makes a lot of sense because the tenon can be used to leave additional material on the bottom of the bowl so you can shape the foot of the bowl later any way you'd like. Where a mortise or a recessed area doesn't really allow that so easily. So what I'm doing is I'm going to mount this in the 4-jaw chuck, and then I'm going to work on the other side of the piece and put a mortise there, that will become the bottom of the bowl. After doing this, now that I'm thinking about it, I actually could have just done a mortise right here. And instead of doing that tenon, I could have cleaned up that face and created a recessed mortise, and I would have had the bottom of the piece done. So I would have saved a step. So if you're listening to this and you're paying attention, what you might want to do is that last step where I cleaned up the bottom, actually do this step, and you'll save yourself one step, essentially. That's what I mean by taking a different path. I'm essentially almost at the destination, except I drove around the block one extra time. I still got to the same spot as we were going to get to, but I kind of took a little bit longer route. Okay, so now I'm marking the dimension for the recessed mortise. And I'm going to use my mortising scraper. This is actually kind of cool. I don't use this a lot, but what happens is I can basically start scraping away an interior recessed area and get the dovetail angle just right on the side of this mortise recess. So I'm going to work back and forth and scrape this down to get a depth. It's about 1/4 of an inch, or what would that be? About 6 or 8 millimeters deep for you metric guys. I know you're out there. I hear from you frequently. Okay, so you can see here closer, I'm basically just scraping away the depth first, back and forth. Getting a nice smooth bottom to the recessed mortise. And then I can take the left edge of this, which has got the dovetail angle, and press that in to make a nice clean cut on the edge, which you'll see here now. So it's starting to remove some of that material, but you're better off just pulling out and then pushing back in at an angle. Now, that's not good enough because I still have the cut line from the dividers, which is leaving rough material in there. And as you know, we need a good clean connection to the jaws of the 4-jaw chuck. So pressing in, I can clean up that angle and bring this mortise into shape all in one shot. So this is a great tool, and again, I'll have a link to that in the description below. So now I'm going to flip it over again. This is the step that we could have avoided if we had just done the mortise first. Now I'm going to expand the jaws. Now, with a mortise and with a tenon, the turn piece does not sit at the base of the jaws ever. It sits on top of the jaws like you see right there. That's why I wanted you guys to see that angle. I'm not letting that go all the way down to the bottom of the chuck. If you do that, you don't have a true supported connection. So I'm going to clean this area away. Make a nice clean face here. And now what I need to do is I need to transfer the dimensions of the first piece that we made. So I want to get the overall width. Now I do not want this to be a tight fit. It needs to be relatively close, but it needs to be a loose fit. So I'm not trying to make this snap in or anything like that. And now I'll use the dimensions for the interior, and I'll mark that on the piece as well. Okay, so I've got my 2 marks there. I'm gonna use my parting tool to just slowly nibble away the depth or the path in between those 2 marks. What's nice about this narrow parting tool is it's going to give me the ability to make nice 90-degree sides in this channel that I'm creating. Now remember, this is a different grain orientation. This is side grain mounted wood. And again, if that's confusing to you, if you understand what a supported grain cut is, it's vital for turning. And in grain and side grain are opposite of one another. So you're going to want to understand that. I've got a video all about supported grain cuts. You're going to want to check that out. I'll put a link to that here. Okay, it fits, it's the right size, it's loose, it's exactly what we wanted. You want to periodically stop and check the piece and make sure it's the size you want. Now I'm going to clean up that bottom, just flatten it out a little bit. I can do this with a variety of different tools. If I had a narrow, flat scraper, I could do that too. A square scraper, carbide scraper would work well here. Just take your time and make a nice smooth bottom there, and this piece will interact with the previous piece, as you'll see in just a moment. Okay, so that's the general shape of what we have for the base. Now I'm going to go ahead and curve this outer side, just kind of a decorative element to match the curve of the top of the first piece. So I'm going to use my 1/2-inch bowl gouge and come around the corner here, round that off. Use a little bit of a shear scrape here to smooth that out. All right. Now I'm going to sand this piece down, and we'll have both the pieces sanded and ready to go. I also want to take down these little sharp interior edges. I don't need them to be quite that sharp, and as a matter of fact, they could cut what we're going to be doing next. So we don't want that. So we want to kind of ease those sharp edges. Now I'm going to use the tried and true linseed oil or Danish oil, which is just linseed oil without the beeswax. This will soak into the wood relatively quickly. I put a coat on, and in about 10 minutes you wipe off any excess. I've dipped that little rag in the oil and squeegeed it off so that there was no excess oil on it. That is actually enough oil to do both of these pieces completely. You just need to have oil on the surface of the wood, and that's it. But look at that cherry. Isn't that absolutely gorgeous? I love the way that looks. It is just a beautiful wood to turn. Okay, so if you haven't looked at the end yet and you're still wondering, I hope you're surprised here to see what we're going to do with this. Okay, so here are our 2 pieces, and here are the sizes of this. This is how tall they are. And now these are rough measurements, so you can make this any size you want, but this gives you an idea. And there's the size of the base of both pieces. All right, so now what is this? Okay, so what you can do is get yourself some paper. It could be newspaper, it could be any kind of scrap paper. It needs to be something relatively thin and uncoated so that it will break down naturally. And newspaper is great for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this so it's a little bit longer than the bottom part of our guide or our press. I'm going to call this a press because that's really what this is. Okay, so it sticks out a little bit beyond the bottom. I've doubled over the newspaper, and I'm going to roll our cylinder around, or roll the newspaper around the cylinder. Okay, so we've got this excess material at the bottom. We just fold that in, fold it over itself, and now we're going to use our turned piece as a press. You just simply wiggle this around and press that bottom in, and it forms a shape at the bottom of this paper naturally that turns it into a container. Now you can fill this with soil. This is a simple potting mix that I have. So you can use this to start seeds or repot a plant. You can make a whole bunch of these. You're probably going to want to put them in a tray so that they don't leak out. They were not going to completely contain water, and after a few weeks they will dissolve. And that's the great part, is these can be put straight in the ground like this and they will dissolve away. Now you can easily make as many pots for seeds or plants as you need, and they're all free.
Well, there you have it. Now you see what we've been making this whole time. We've been making a custom press to create molds for our potted plants. Now, this is pretty fun if you think about it. It's actually really cool because we can use a piece of recycled timber to make a piece of paper usable for gardening and for our plants. We can use whatever paper. This is newspaper. You can use an old paper bag, whatever you have, something that's relatively thin and is uncoated so that it will dissolve in water. Because the other cool thing about this is once this plant gets plenty of roots going in that, I'll just dig a hole and put it in the ground, and this shell that we've made, or this little pot that we've made, will dissolve and fall apart, and the plant will just go right through it. Now, this is rosemary. I love rosemary. All you do is you cut off a big sprig of the rosemary, take some leaves off at the bottom, stick it in a glass of water. In a couple weeks, you're going to have roots that are going to come out of the bottom of it. And at that point, you just put it in a little pot like this, and that gives this pot, and the soil will give the roots time to get larger and more mature, and then it'll be ready to go into the ground. It's that simple. And with this really cool wood-turned well, I almost hit myself in the head. With this really cool tool that you've just turned, you can make as many of these you need, and they're all completely free, recycled, and really functional. So I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen. If you are going to make this project and you're going to give it to somebody, or if you're going to use it for yourself, leave me a comment below and let me know how it turns out for you. While this project wasn't a bowl, it was a vessel, and there were a lot of techniques that we use that are very similar to what we do when we're turning bowls. So I hope you've enjoyed this little change up from all of my other videos. So I hope you've enjoyed it. And as always, until next time, happy turning.